Well, I think I'm going to get started. Okay, I can't hear anybody over there. You hear me okay? Is it look all right on your end? Does Can you see my screen now with the PowerPoint? All right. Well, I'm going to get started, and I'll be watching the chat box here. Sorry for the delay. Since we're the last presentation today, can we go till 4 o'clock? Take the full 50 minutes. Okay, good. All right, let's do that. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending the session here this afternoon. I'm going to talk about trust responsibility and environmental protection. And my name is Mervyn Wright Jr. I am the environmental manager here with the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe. I did submit my bio to the conference, and so if you need to take a look at my experience and all that, it's going to be there. Okay, so my outline, I'm going to do an introduction. I'm going to talk about the origins of trust responsibility and trust, and talk about consultation and the next step. I did originally have traditional ecological knowledge included with this when I submitted my proposal. However, there's just not enough time to include. I had like 3 or 4 slides that I had included there with PEK, but it is just not enough time. As an introduction, I want to just mention that our tribal resources are always placed in jeopardy um, with the threats of environmental destruction by the authorization of federal, state, and local actions. And these include mining, nuclear waste, industrial and commercial development, and fossil fuel development. And today there are over 300 reservations that are threatened with environmental hazards. This includes fish and wildlife, our land and water resources, and sacred places. The 1984 EPA Indian policy, certainly includes the objective there to protect human health and the environment, which is one of the principles that we constantly advocate and remind the EPA that that's their responsibility. The policy does stress 2 themes, which is that the federal government will pursue the principles of self-government, which is more or less sovereignty and the sovereign ability of tribes to conduct the actions and activities that they do, and that the EPA will work directly with tribal governments on a government-to-government basis. And for those that have been in with the meetings yesterday, with the RTOC, the Tribal Caucus, along with the plenary, we talked quite a bit about government-to-government relations and how the EPA is aiming to improve and strengthen the government-to-government relationship. And the actions that EPA program managers, how they conduct their activities, certainly is going to be in compliance with the congressionally mandated responsibilities. So the origins of trust, and the United States is the government was formed in 1776, and 23 years later, this principle was developed through the Northwest Ordinance, which states that the utmost good faith will always be observed towards the Indians. Their land and property shall never be taken from them without their consent, and property rights and liberty, they shall never be invaded or disturbed unless in justified and lawful wars authorized by Congress, but laws founded in justice and humanity shall from time to time be made for preventing wrongs being done to them and for the preserving peace and friendship with them. And those of us that have watched the history unfold, we know that, of course, when you look at the United States and how it was formed. You know, the lands no longer are in total control of Native people. So, but I thought this was an important principle that was one of the first actions by the United States government to acknowledge tribal status. Then came the martial trilogies of the 1830s, around 1830s. Of course, in 1823 was the Johnson-McIntosh decision, which basically was a discovery doctrine, you know, and it did not allow tribes to have a right, you know, to occupy the lands for which the United States discovered, you know, apparently. But that was the Supreme Court decision that established that. Then came the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, which set up the ward-guardian relationship, and basically is the doctrine of federal trust responsibility. And then, of course, we have the 1832 Worcester versus Georgia, that stated the federal government and not the states have authority over Indian affairs, and that tribes retained inherent sovereignty. And again, this is why we always advocate that states do not have a trust responsibility towards tribes, nor do they have a government-to-government relationship. The Marshall Court, of course, gave the United States all the powers of a conqueror, and that Indian nations were proper subjects for conquest. And even though the United States did not conquer Native nations, you know, they left it to the army and others to, you know, basically commit the genocide and the removal of tribes from lands, and allowed the courts to basically confirm those property status. So with trust, you know, there is the unintended consequences, and this is a term that is currently being used, and you'll see it in a lot of the EPA policy and the rules that are being created with the actions that they take with promulgating regulations and developing laws. And I'll get into unintended consequences a little later on too. But this is basically it was set for limited application, but it instead gave rise to the massive displacement of people and created an entire legal regime. You know, this is where they legalized the taking of our lands. They legalized the killing of our people. And of course, you know, as time rolled along, laws were created, and now we're looking at the situation we are with our trust relationship with the United States. The imperial dissolution, this is a term that I found in one of the books that I used here with my reference, but basically it pushed out the British government, and it basically established the new United States government, and that the courts ruled that the rights of civilized nations gave them the independence and for the rule of their decisions to be applied. And so that's where the Supreme Court established its legal standing, you know, for laws of the land. Trust responsibility, it does cover the protection and enhancement of Indian trust resources and tribal self-government, which is the sovereignty that we tend to exercise. It extends to tribes to its members, for on and off members, and it applies to all federal agencies. And it does not only apply to the executive branch, but it also applies to the Congress, which is, of course, the legislative branch. Tribal sovereignty is inherent, and that it did exist prior to the United States constitutional beginning. And the federal responsibility to protect and enhance tribal assets, fiscal and natural, human, cultural resources through policy decisions and management actions. So when we talk about the actions of the United States governments, U.S. agencies, this is basically what it includes. This is, when those actions are taken upon these types of resources and assets, this is how we as tribes are supposed to be involved, engaged with those actions. And so I'll get into consultation now. This this was taken from the Executive Order 13175, which was Bill Clinton's administration, President Clinton, and it was issued on November 6, 2000. And this is where I saw on the agenda there was another session earlier today that involved consultation, and I looked at the abstract there, and what I'm going to be talking about basically complements, I believe, what was said earlier today. That in order to establish regular, meaningful consultation, this is where tribal officials, with the development of federal policies that have tribal implications, they need to engage with tribes early in this, early in the activity of what they're looking to establish. And of course, it is aimed to strengthen the United States government-to-government relationship with Indian tribes. And it also is aimed to reduce the imposition of unfunded mandates, which, when we see a lot of the actions that are taken by Congress, there are a lot of unfunded mandates that occur. And when we expect funding support, and when we see agencies moving toward enacting these mandates, we don't necessarily see the funds that come to support it. This is the process that we understand how consultation is supposed to be conducted, and that certainly is not the case today. And we brought it up yesterday when Ms. Everett presented the Region 9 strategic plan that has already been drafted, and now they're looking to tribes to engage in consultation to provide input. And we see this throughout the United States, the federal agencies, when it comes to rulemaking, and when it comes to actions that they want to instill upon tribes, that they usually write their intentions, as it was said yesterday during the VOTUS update with Tohono O'odham Legal Counsel, where they were trying to talk about the repeal rule. Now, the district court in Arizona did vacate the VOTUS rule from the Trump administration, but the EPA and Army Corps have decided that they needed to develop a repeal rule. And this is what was shared with us yesterday, with what I'm telling you. And I raised this question in the earlier session with Tomas Torres in the Office of Water out of Region 9 about how the courts vacated the rule. And then when, and this is what the Tohono O'odham Legal Counsel told us yesterday, that when EPA reached out to them, a draft repeal rule was already sitting at the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. And so when we see this type of action, this is why it gets frustrating for us when we try to engage in consultation, because they tell us they have note takers, and sometimes when they're recording presentations, they'll shut the recording off and then ask us for our comments. And so this is part of our frustration when we work with EPA. And although they're looking to want to improve and build upon and strengthen the government-to-government relationship, I'm not quite sure if they really meet the terms of what's on the screen here with this consultation process. because not only are they supposed to give us relevant facts early in the decision-making process, they're supposed to give us sufficient time to consider the situation and provide technical assistance and additional data when we request it. And of course, we need to maintain the dialogue with the agency, and we have to document each step of that consultation process. And I say this because with the lithium mine here in northern Nevada, that's what we're asking the tribes up in the northern Nevada area to do, is to take a look at the record and find out if meaningful and effective consultation occurred early on in this process of the Bureau of Land Management's approval of that permit. And that is a NEPA requirement, the National Environmental Policy Act. That's a requirement of NEPA. And so we used it in a situation here at Pyramid Lake, and we had a spent nuclear fuel transportation project that was issued by the Department of Energy. They were transporting spent nuclear fuel from Thailand in Asia, and they were transporting it up to Idaho. And we have a railway that crosses the north end of our reservation, and they issued the record of decision, and we didn't know anything about it. And so we had to play the NEPA card, and I ended up meeting with Secretary Pena, the Secretary of Energy. I met with him, and this is how we got our emergency response program started here at Pyramid Lake. But that's what it took, for us to take a look at this consultation process and to make sure that they did engage early on. So I encourage that, and so when we're looking at the situations that we're facing with the Clean Water Act and other rulemaking and actions of EPA, we need to make sure that we follow this process closely so that, we basically don't let them off the hook. Now, in the end, if the agency, they should be accepting the tribe's recommendations, but of course it does give a process unless compelling reasons require otherwise. Now, if that's the case, when tribal recommendations are not accepted, they do need to send a detailed written explanation for the reasons of their final decision. And whether we receive that or not in the processes that are currently underway, we've yet to see. I know that in the WOTUS process back in 2018 with the Trump administration, when they issued their initial rule, and they started having their public meetings, they did receive over 750,000 comments across the country. But when you look at the original version of what they proposed and you look at the final versions in which they ended up issuing, there was really no change. And so we look at that as they didn't take anything into account from those public comments. And then, of course, with these executive orders and as well as the executive memorandum that was issued in January of this year by the Biden administration, we always see this disclaimer language in these executive orders where it does basically limit the ability to do anything legally if a party doesn't fulfill its obligation under in this case, under the executive order or the executive memorandum. That basically says, the tribes really might not have anything that they can do, should something go wrong and there may be intention for legal action. And so you always got to look at the bottom line or the fine print in a lot of these agreements to take a look at these disclaimer type language. And so it makes it frustrating, but it also it's what the United States government does. And I think with its ward guardian relationship, and this is again another one of those frustrating matters that we have when we're looking at our ability to protect the environment and the activities that are required that we feel is required to protect the environment. And a lot of times we get denied, requests to do certain things. We get denied, and we're asked to jump through hoops and follow certain requirements that, whether or not that's equal across the board to other parties like local governments or city governments, state governments. You know, we have to make sure that we take a look at the full picture to make sure that it is equitable and that we're playing on a level playing field. And one of the things that I mentioned yesterday during the Tohono O'odham legal counsel presentation on WOTUS, was the experience that I had with the NAGPRA Review Committee. I did serve 1 4-year term on the NAGPRA Review Committee, and it seemed like every time the tribe began to gain an advantage, and when we began to, basically pull ahead and start seeing success, the rules get changed, and this is something that has happened. And so we're always having to look at the interests that are supporting the opposition to what tribes are wanting to complete. And a lot of times it's corporate interests, it's industrial interests that tend to control the outcomes of some of these actions. So when we get to our next steps, again, I mentioned the unintended consequences earlier, and this is something that has become more common, I see, with a lot of the actions that the government agencies are instituting. But this is why, scientific analysis is so important. And one of the things that we see, especially with climate change, is that when you have modern technological advances that are being applied, the environment certainly ends up becoming the testing lab. This is how I see it. And when things don't go right and mistakes are made, sometimes we just don't learn. And what we're seeing now with climate change and the use of fossil fuels, now we have to undo some of those actions. And for the sake of the environment, sometimes those interests to protect the environment are not always equal, or at least we don't see it that way when it comes to the intentions of the United States or those agencies. And I did include the traditional knowledges, and I know that there's activity right now amongst a number of federal agencies that are starting to include traditional knowledge, but it's not yet on a formal accepted level, because you got modern and Western science that are standing out there. Basically, you have engineers and firms and companies that need to make a profit, and so a lot of times they won't look at doing these simple, obvious, natural things to protect the environment. They want to institute their scientific methodologies, and whether they're testing them and whether they're looking at them. I mean, forecasting is a good example. It's not an exact science, but it is used for planning and for purposes. Of course, we look at forecasting too quite closely to see whether or not we're having an atmospheric river coming our way, and of course we have to prepare for that. Everyone has to prepare for that. So in some sense, technological advances are important, but it's how you apply, especially if they're model runs and you're looking at, trying to produce an outcome that we can prepare for, that sometimes those assumptions are not always logical. And of course, I'm always advocating about corporate greed and seeing that it is the underlying motive on a political, on the administrative, and on the judicial level. And about a week before we met with the administrator in Washington, we saw an article that came out of the Wall Street Journal that talked about 35 cases that are likely going to be dismissed because those judges, those federal judges, had a financial interest, in those cases, and they did not recuse themselves. And so, basically, when you're looking at the control of our government and you see how corporate greed is right at the heart of it, this is what we're up against. And I know tribes, not all the tribes have, millions of dollars that it can contribute to our political leaders, but this is how you tend to see. So I'm hoping that as we proceed in taking care of our responsibility with protecting the environment, that the logical approach that we take to protect the environment with what we know is understood and accepted. So in moving forward, of course, we have to educate. And, those of us that have been at this as long as we have, we're in this constant mode of education, federal employees, new administrations, even our own tribal administrations, and we have changes in our tribal government and our elected leaders. We have to educate them as well. And so we're constantly in this mode of education. And of course, with the historical experience that we've seen over the years, we don't tend to learn from the mistakes that we make. And, a good example here at Pyramid Lake is the Newlands Reclamation Project. It nearly destroyed our fishery. It did a lot of environmental damage to our ecosystems here in the lower Truckee River and Pyramid Lake and our fishery. And we don't see, they continued building dams after that, because the Newlands project was the very first reclamation project in the country. And of course, the dam construction on the Colorado River, on the Rio Grande, and up in the Missouri, and the Columbia, all of these river systems all experienced dam building, back in the early part of the century, the 20th century. And of course, we have to continue building upon that trust. And how we do that, is up to each and one of us as individuals. When we express our positions on different actions that are being taken by the agencies, it's nothing personal against any of the leadership of those agencies. And even with EPA Region 9, we know that there's limitations there, but I don't think it's our intent just to purposely throw them into the corner or throw them up against the wall and then read them the riot act on what they think, on what we think they should do. I think we have to look at and approach this in a way where, of course, the environment is the one that is the one factor that we have to always be mindful of, in knowing that our aquatic life, our wildlife, the birds, the plant life, everything, is dependent on what we can do to protect it. And as we all know, that they can't speak on their own behalf. And when it comes to climate change, we have to learn from, our environment. We have to look at our environment to know that, how adaptation occurs on that natural level with our wildlife and with our plant life, our aquatic life. We have to appreciate that, to a certain extent, and how we transition that understanding, to the scientific realm that is depended upon by, our leadership. This is what we have to do. We have to find those ways to advocate scientifically, which is, the biological knowledge, the chemical knowledge, the aquatic habitat, the biodiversity, all of it. We have to be able to transition that knowledge into everyday scientific terms. And this is my references that I used to develop this presentation today. Some of these books are old. That doesn't say anything about my ability, but some of them are pretty recent too, though. It's just a matter of looking at what we came through as Native people, from the beginning of our interaction with the folks from Europe when they came to this continent. And so, you know, from the book on conquest by law, that's a good book. A little bit difficult to read, but it's a good book. I find that the book by Dave Wilkins and The Uneven Ground, that is a really good book. That's an easy read. I mean, I got through it pretty easy, and I think many of you would benefit from reading that. You know, and of course, you know, Stephen Tovar and the Rights of Indians and the Tribes. You know, that's a good book. Walter Echohawk wrote a good book, In the Light of Justice. Walter actually was part of our what we called our culturally unidentifiable national working group. And so I've got to know Walter pretty well. Of course, Vine Deloria, we all are familiar with his writing, and that's where I found the most good faith Northwest Ordinance document. So I guess at this time I'll entertain any questions that people have. I hope that went well. I know I can't hear anybody. I don't know why my speakers aren't working, but this is, you know, when, you know, when we're trying to speak, you know, on behalf of our environment, and when we're having to share our story, and I've always said this to people, you know, our tribal leadership, that our story is not a kind thing to tell, and so don't be kind in telling it. And I say this because one time I was getting ready to travel to Washington D.C. and I was at the airport in Reno getting ready to fly out. And my brother-in-law asked me what I was going to Washington for, and I told him that it was a time to insult, but not to be insulting. And so yeah, I have this presentation in a PDF format, which is what I'm probably going to send to Shasta and the organizers of the conference. And that way all of you can download it and have it available to you. And when you have an opportunity to talk to your tribal leadership back home, you know, use this information. You know, there's always a source, you know, for what we say. There's always a source of our positions that we take. And it's not necessarily to argue every point that we want to make or have an opinion about everything, because we all do have opinions, you know. And you know, as the RTOC tribal co-chair, you know, it's my job to listen, and it's my job to advocate, and I'm going to do my best, you know, to continue doing what I do and how I approach it. And I do have folks like all of you that can advise me. If you see me heading the wrong direction, you know, I expect one of you guys to get off the hook and yank me back and get me back in line. But that's what it takes. That's what it takes to be a good leader, you know. And I try to be a good leader, and you know, I think all the years of experience of, you know, being on our tribal council here, serving 3 terms as a tribal chairman and 2 terms as a vice chairman, that's how it rolled out. You guys all have my email. I hope you have my email. And you know, if you have any questions, I'll be certainly happy to oblige to, you know, try to offer some advice, to try to offer some comments or directions that we need. And just as I brought up the issue yesterday with the Tohono O'odham legal counsel, and I did say this in the meeting yesterday, that we want to be able to utilize our RTOC members that are from the southern Arizona area. Michael Henry is an RTOC member right from Tohono O'odham. And of course, Pasco Yaqui, they're part of our tribal caucus, as well as Hopi. Those are the three tribes that are involved in this case that are from Region 9. And then there's some other tribes in the Midwest and the Upper Plains that are also in that case. So um, constant challenge, that's all I could say. And when that hill in front of us is getting steeper and more steep in front of us, sometimes we feel like we need to get a ladder to get up to the top, but we'll get there. We'll get there. We just got to keep rolling and doing the best we can. I want to, thank all of you too, our Tribal Caucus and our RTOC members. Those that serve on the MTOC also, want to thank them for participating with all of these meetings. I mean, I have to tell you that I learned a few things yesterday, um, and I have to too, have that humility about myself. Try to have an open mind about ideas and thoughts, and want to make sure that I'm not going to be closed-minded. And I learned this early on in my tenure as tribal chairman. My first term as a vice chairman and my first term as a tribal chairman, I was pretty stubborn back then, and I was pretty closed-minded with the way I did things. But when you see the opposition and when you have to deal with the contention, then you have to back up and sometimes regroup and take a look at things with an open mind. And it's tough sometimes when you're set in your way, but when it comes to our environment and the protection of our environment, we have to humble up a bit. We have to become humble, but at the same time, we're here for a reason. Each and one of us, we all have a purpose, and don't deny yourself, the abilities that you have and the capabilities that you possess. Always, always carry forward, what you know and how you know it. And once in a while, you might have to sit down with your elder relatives and your elder family members and talk to them about some of this stuff. And it does help. Sally Manning, with trust responsibility comes some obligations for protection. Is the Fed government truly fulfilling its obligation to protect it now and in the future? A lot of times, it's difficult to see it that way. A lot of times, when actions are presented, um, we sometimes end up scratching our head wondering what the heck's going on. But, just as we, of course, when I was in the session earlier with Tomas, and I'm putting these questions out there, and I'm not trying to put him on the spot, and I'm not trying to throw him under the bus or anything like that. It's just that these are questions that we want to hear from, our agency colleagues, and because what they know and what we know, we put those together, and I'm hoping that if we have to elevate issues to headquarters, that we're going to be standing together on this. And I did share with them a matter that we're preparing some comments with regard to some state actions here on ecological and aesthetic water policy that the state's looking to, the state of Nevada is looking to institute here. And of course, they're going to be establishing anti-degradation protocols on designating certain waters with ecological and aesthetic value. And we need to make sure that Kermit Lake, the Truckee River, and other rivers there in Nevada, the Carson, the Walker, the Humboldt, and the folks up on the eastern side of Nevada, as well as in southern Nevada, and we need to make sure that how the state approaches tribal interests, is going to be preserved and protected. And so we're going to do our best to comment on this proposed policy. And, we always have to keep in mind, those tribes that don't have staff, the tribes that don't have an RTOC representation. We have issues of the lithium mines here in Nevada as well as in Arizona. And of course, the wildfires and climate change and the impacts of the drought in California. And so, it's our intention to do everything we can to have the resources identified and have the resources available. When I was watching these presentations earlier today and how this platform is set up, with the exception of the audio problems we had here, I'm really looking forward to being able to use um, these types of platforms, and of course, hopefully, come winter our talk and spring our talk, and the meetings we have scheduled for next year, that we're ultimately going to be face to face again. I'm really looking forward to it. But I hope that this presentation that I conducted today, that some of you can build upon it, and maybe next year at next year's conference that you will be making a presentation, from your experience and from how your programs are moving forward with the functions that it's conducting, in your areas. And I encourage that. And so anyway, I guess with that, I'd do my best to keep this limited too. I know I can talk a lot, and just want to make sure that we had enough time to get through this. And like I said, the traditional ecological knowledge, that's a whole uh, component of itself. And when we start looking at traditional knowledges that we try to institute, through the scientific methodologies that are applied, that we're going to be able to engage with our traditional knowledge. But it's also my fear that when we start to look at um, the use of traditional knowledge, that it's not going to be exploited, not only by the agencies, but by our own tribal memberships too, that we don't start seeing people looking to make a dollar from it, and start selling it and, trying to make a name for themselves for what they know, because once it's done, it's done.
Mervin, can you hear me right now?
And for our young
Guess
folks
not.
that are out there, our young environmental staff, um, we want to encourage you guys too to step up to the plate when you're asked. Don't be shy. Don't hesitate when you're asked a question. You might have to hesitate to gather your thoughts, but you know, when those of us are relying on you and your ability, we're going to ask you, to step in and step up. And if you need help, if you need some words of encouragement, those of us that have been at this for some time, you can look to us to help you along. And we'd be happy to do that. Yeah, I want to thank you all again. Shasta's going to end this broadcast, so um, I guess I'll try to join the lounge when I can and get involved and talk with you guys some more. It's a little odd doing the virtual meetings, but we'll eventually be face to face, and it's going to be a lot better. Thank you, Shasta.